You know, he was on the board of scientific advisors. I worked for him.
Of my mother, Peggy, my brother, Cliff, my uncle, John, and our entire extended family when I tell you how much it means to us to have you all here to remember my dad. Looking out on all your familiar faces brings back such good memories. Memories which have given us a chance to live some of the best part of our lives all over again. We've been strengthened by how many of you have shared with us your own personal and touching and fun experiences of my dad. We've been uplifted to know that he meant so much to so many. His was a life well lived. We deeply appreciate you being here today. Thank you. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Brendan Lee, the Robert and Janice McNair Endowed Chair in Molecular and Human Genetics, Professor and Chairman, Department of Molecular and Human Genetics, Baylor College of Medicine. Thank you, Brendan.
Welcome, Peggy, Carolyn, Cliff, John, friends and colleagues. It's my great pleasure on behalf of the Department of Molecular and Human Genetics to welcome you in this celebration of Dr. Tom Caskey's life, and it really is a celebration. On the program, we highlighted how Tom's life was one of riding a wave of innovation, and we look forward to sharing the remembrances from a few of you who was touched deeply by that wave. On behalf of the department that he founded, we have become both a product and a reflection of his vision, translating innovative basic science discoveries to the wave of genomic medicine. And this has directly led to its preeminent standing of the department today. We and I will miss his very much can-do attitude. This is the quintessential quality that convinced me and many of us here in this room to train and to build our careers here. But I will assure you that it will live on in the faculty, the trainees, and the staff of this department, and more broadly at Baylor College of Medicine. So with that, I think we will share several videos, and then we will start the remembrances, and we invite.
In June 1966, I arrived at the NIH having just completed an internship and residency in medicine at the Massachusetts General Hospital. I was lucky to join the Laboratory of Biochemical Genetics headed by Marshall Nirenberg. When Nirenberg discovered that I had no previous biochemical experience, he assigned me to work with an unknown 27-year-old scientist named Tom Caskey, who had just taken over his own section in the Nirenberg lab. Tom was only 1 year older than I was, but he took a fatherly liking to me when he discovered that we were both native South Carolinians who spoke with the same dialect. We both preferred y'all to you all. Within several days of meeting Tom, I was struck by the fact that he was an exciting talker and a mesmerizing teller of tales. Tom's brain was a mental Rolodex filled with anecdotes and jokes that could be adapted to any occasion. When I joined Tom, he had a tiny one-room lab where 5 of us, Tom, his technician, Ed Scolnick, Art Beaudet, and I, were crammed in like sardines. We were crowded, but we had fun. The highlight of the day was at the end of the day when we all gathered around the simulation counter to criticize each other's data. These were indeed scintillating moments. As a mentor, Tom taught me how to design the perfect experiment, one that would give a clear-cut answer, either positive or negative. As Tom would say every day, focus on the results with big changes. For that, I will always be grateful. Knowing how to design the killer experiment has been key to the research on cholesterol that Michael Brown and I have done over the last 50 years at UT Southwestern. There are certain things about Tom, the person, that I will always cherish. He knew how to be a true friend. He was never comfortable on the sidelines. Tom was a born leader who energized people and made them believe they could be better. None of us will ever forget Tom's trademark laugh that began with a boisterous guffaw. How will heaven deal with C. Thomas Caskey, this irrepressible force of nature? We have all lost a friend. Peggy has lost a caring husband, and Baylor has lost a scientific pillar. But heaven has gained a human hurricane of energy, exhilaration, and excitement. who will keep the good Lord on his toes. May the good Lord rest in peace. Thank you.
Hello, it is with real sadness today that I am paying tribute to my friend and mentor, Dr. Tom Caskey. It is a tremendous honor to be asked to do this, and I want to actually begin by expressing my deepest condolences to his wife, Peggy, who is a wonderful person and whom I've known for 50 years of my life. So I met Tom in 1967 when I joined the Marshall Nuremberg lab at the NIH. When I joined the Nuremberg laboratory, I came to work on the genetic code, the unknowns at that time, the things that were still unknown in the genetic code at that time. And I was quickly informed by Marshall that he had changed his research focus to neurobiology. And I had two choices. I could work on neurobiology with him, or I could work on the genetic code with somebody named Tom Caskey. And I really wanted to work on the genetic code. I said to myself, who is this guy, Tom Caskey? And will this turn out to be a good or bad situation that I've gotten myself into? Well, it turned out to be one of the best decisions I'd ever made in my life. Tom was a fantastic mentor, a brilliant scientist, took me under his wing and taught me in the best Nuremberg lab tradition how to do rigorous experimental science. And we worked together to understand how the stop signals in the genetic code worked. And as I said in the eulogy I wrote for the Journal of the National Academy, Tom had a brilliant idea for an assay that was developed, a simple assay that didn't require the complexity that Mario Capecchi's assay had used. And he set it up, it worked. And then in the late spring, before Memorial Day weekend, he went on vacation for a long weekend, which he certainly deserved, leaving Teresa and I and Dick Tompkins to do the big experiment that we've been planning for months. And in that experiment, we discovered the fact that there were two protein termination factors recognizing different triplet pairs, as I again outlined in my eulogy of Tom in the PNAS journal. And then we cleaned everything up in the lab very late Friday night. We hid all the notebooks, so in case Tom came in early, he couldn't find any of the data. And we teased him for a while on Monday until we finally showed him what we had discovered. And that was a tremendous positive experience in my life. It really introduced me to first-class research with first-class people. And the satisfaction I got from that changed my entire scientific career. And Tom was instrumental in inducing that change. I worked with him for another couple of years and then switched over to the Cancer Institute. He eventually went to Baylor. I remained at the NIH. We remained friends for many years by email and telephone calls, and saw each other on occasion, kept track of each other's families. And then in the mid-90s, he approached us about joining Merck, and we were delighted that he wanted to do that because he introduced us to human genetics, and we incorporated his overview into some of our drug discovery planning. His introduction to human genetics led me to go to a talk by David Altshuler, one of the founding members of the Broad, on the human genome at the National Institutes of Health. while the genome was being sequenced, and eventually led to my recruitment to the Broad to form the program to try to understand the genetics of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So Tom had a really profound influence on my life. He was a mentor, a colleague, a good friend. We emailed back and forth very often during the last couple of years of COVID, talking about what should be done and what was being done. And I cannot express enough how sad I am at his unexpected and tragic passing away. I thank him in memoriam for everything he did to stimulate my career in research. I wish his family all the best as they mourn his loss. And I remain, even to this day, very sad about losing such a good friend and colleague. I hope the memorial for him at Baylor goes very well and that everybody comes to fully appreciate what a wonderful scientist and human being he was.
Well, I sort of go back. I actually met Tom in 1966 when I was a medical student, and I was fortunate enough to do a summer rotation in the Nuremberg lab, and again, I was turned over to Tom. Tom introduced me to Margie. We were married about a year later. And then I returned to work for 2 years under Tom after going off and graduating from medical school and doing a couple of years of residency. And I think I was sort of the first one to be the recruited by the Pied Piper of molecular and medical genetics. He had an opportunity in Houston. He encouraged me to come along. I was ecstatic working with him, and like you've just heard from the previous two videos, it was absolutely the most fun you can imagine working in that environment. I'm not certain I understood really all of Tom's strengths when I came to Houston, but I knew pretty well, certainly I had worked with him closely. Recently, Peggy Caskey gave me a copy of a book entitled The Least Likely Man, describing the life and work of Nuremberg, or Marshall as everybody called him. I would like to inform everyone here listening who has worked with Tom that you are also a scientific descendant of Nuremberg. Some of the things you associate with Tom came from Marshall. Things like quickie experiments that would give a clear-cut yes or no answer, asking important scientific questions, never trusting any reagent from a company or another scientist. And some things which maybe have changed a little bit, repeating experiments again and again and again was one of his trademarks, which nowadays, if you clone a gene, you don't do it again and again and again. Fortunately, the data are clear enough that you know you've arrived. And also keeping very meticulous records. The laboratory there had solution books and really a very, very rigorous system. Tom's influence on my career development was about as extensive as one can imagine. It's sort of hard to identify anybody else in my formative years who had anywhere near the amount of interaction that Tom and I had. He opened my eyes to biomedical research, and as you heard from the previous two speakers, we all arrived there knowing nothing about research, zero about research. And we were all interested in going to the NIH because it was better than the Vietnam military service. And person after person got indoctrinated. He introduced me to many famous scientists and that I otherwise never would have known. He brought me to my first scientific meeting, including my first talk in Atlantic City when there were then FASEB meetings there. He sent me off to a course at Cold Spring Harbor, a tissue culture course, which was very important for work we wanted to do once we arrived here in Houston. So I spent 2 years here with him as a postdoc equivalent at NIH, and then the next 23 years worked side by side with him here at Baylor. In the beginning, little did I know how many days and weeks and months and years that I would be working so closely with Tom, and also in the early years, our families were very close, doing lots of holidays together and so on. And Tom and I carpooled from West Houston for years, and you can share a lot of science and a lot of excitement and a lot of everything else in life, going back and forth on the Katy Freeway every day. Tom also was very enthusiastic about being a physician, and last evening I learned something about that. There's a person here, Mike Berlsheimer, who commented that Tom had been involved in the first prenatal diagnosis of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and his son, I think, must have been identified to be unaffected by the prenatal diagnosis. He's now living. And so I went to PubMed a couple of hours ago, and I found a publication from 1989 with a number of names you would recognize. It published in the American Journal of Human Genetics with support from the Berlsheimer family. And this was typical of Tom. He became so immersed in these things. It seems to me that the genetics and genomics excellence at Baylor College of Medicine is one of Tom's greatest legacies. None of what would have ever developed without his leadership. I was really overwhelmed by all the comments that poured in when surrounding Tom's acute illness, who was obviously, he had a huge influence on person after person after person, and you'll probably hear a good bit of this. He taught people how to succeed in science. He developed strong personal ties with everyone. Virtually everyone loved Tom like a brother, and he influenced personal lives far more than might be typical for a scientific mentor. He always had a laugh and elicited a laugh from everyone else. I've known dozens and dozens of scientists and gone out to dinner endless times, and I would say that Tom generated laughter and enjoyment at dinner with colleagues more than any scientist I've ever known. When people talk about mentors, they rarely use the word love, but this word has come up again and again, and I'm sure you'll hear it from people, that people had their lives changed, their professional careers changed, and so on, and really did love him. Tom changed the lives of many of us here in multiple positive ways. He was one of the people that impacted my situation early and extensively.
Dear Tom, I was saddened by your departure a few months ago, but I thought I would let you, your family, and friends know how much I appreciate what you did for me. You truly played a major role in my career, and you were at the root of my success at Baylor College of Medicine. I will always remember how you recruited me to join the Institute of Molecular Genetics in 1989 as an assistant professor. I arrived in Houston on a mid-November Wednesday afternoon, presented my postdoctoral work, and visited with faculty on Thursday and Friday. On Saturday, you invited me off schedule to your home, and your first question was, when I entered your home, Hugo, what do you need to set up your lab here? I asked, does this mean that you offer me a position? Hell yes, you answered. This moment is anchored in my memory, as I felt welcomed and supported as in no other place that I interviewed. I accepted the position a few days later and moved from Switzerland to Houston with my spouse, Catherine Tasnier, now 32 years ago. In August of 1989, when I started, I wanted to meet with you, but was told that you were teaching a course in Corfu, Greece. I wrote my first NIHR1 grant that month and booked an appointment at the end of the month to meet with you to discuss my R1 proposal and get your signature. The discussion was very short. Hugo, I'm sorry, but I forgot to tell you that you are an Howard Hughes medical investigator starting next week, and you do not need to write grants. My response was as baffling as your statement. Can you explain what it means to be an HHMI investigator? He explained what it meant, and I was awestruck. Your support and nomination for this position has had a huge impact on my career. HHMI support was generous and lasted for 32 years. It has allowed me to be intellectually free, explore scientific issues productively, and freed a lot of time from my schedule that I was able to use to promote the development of many resources and techniques for the Drosophila community of researchers. Tom, you were a visionary, eager to recruit basic scientists who use model organisms to tackle fundamental questions in biology and genetics in your institute. You recruited many outstanding scientists, including Allan Bradley, Phil Soriano, Vicky Lundblad, Jim Lupski, Huda Zoghbi, Pragna Patel, David Nelson, Andrea Ballabio, Richard Gibbs, just to name a few. I was very impressed by your vision and the level of support you were able to obtain for all of us. You were also extremely supportive of what I did and went out of your way to embrace my career. You have therefore been at the root of much of the funding I garnered and the success that followed. Indeed, more than 40 postdoctoral fellows and 40 Ph.D. students graduated from my laboratory, and most have positions in premier institutes around the world, spreading the name of the department you founded. As you may remember from the dinner in Uzi's just 2 years ago, you called me a rock star. However, you are the rock star. Your ability to anticipate the future, your vision about genetics and basic science has propelled your institute and later the Department of Molecular and Human Genetics to the best genetics department in the nation. Your vision included clinical testing facilities, emphasis on sequencing the human genome, recruiting model organisms researchers in the bacterial, yeast, fruit fly, and mouse fields, a strong clinical genetics program, and finally, the ability to find financial and scientific support to make it all happen. You have been a major impact on many scientists who have become very successful, and your legacy continues and is most visible with the prominence and success of the Molecular and Human Genetics Department. We are extremely proud of all that you have achieved and are deeply saddened by your departure.
It's my great honor and privilege to speak to you today at the celebration of Tom's life. I'm very sad that I can't be with you personally. My life, like many, was greatly impacted by Tom, who plucked me from Cambridge, UK, and translocated me to Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas in 1987. As we all know, Tom was a larger-than-life character, and what a character he really was. My memories of him are very much his enthusiasm for science, as well as other aspects, like his effusive laughter, which was very disarming in many circumstances, and the generosity of his praise and his positivity. These were great attributes which I remember very, very fondly. I'm recording this message from Cambridge today, and I'm sure many of you are aware Tom had a great fondness of Cambridge, in part, I think, because of this sabbatical year he spent here with Peggy and the kids. And although our time in Cambridge overlapped, I didn't actually meet Tom when he was in Cambridge. I met Tom, in fact, at a Gordon conference in 1985, when I stood in for my advisor, Martin Evans. Some months after that Gordon conference, I received a phone call from Tom in full recruitment mode. I'm sure many of you remember similar phone calls. I succumbed, like many, to the flattery and also to the opportunity to come to the department. And boy, what a department it was to become. On my first visit to Houston, Tom arranged for a faculty dinner at the Doctors Club. Sometime that afternoon, Tom asked me if I had a jacket, and of course I did not have such a thing, and nor did I have a tie. So he arranged for Peggy to select suitable items from their son's wardrobe, which she kindly brought along for the event. I still remember when Peggy got in the car that evening, and Tom immediately started telling her how impressed he was with the work that I was doing and the opportunity that lay in front of me. The flattery was effusive, it was genuine, and it was heartfelt. I would like to elaborate a little on that last point, because it tells us something else about Tom's vision and confidence in me as an individual, and I'm sure in many of you as well. In fact, when I arrived, I was asked to submit a grant to NIH, as I dutifully did within a few months of arriving. And this grant, some months later, I received a score, and the score put the grant in the 50th percentile, so very, very unfundable score. The grant, in fact, was very similar to one that I had submitted in the UK, and was the same grant, in fact, on that was discussed by the panel chaired by Sydney Brenner. And although Sydney was very negative, the panel did actually award me that grant. The NIH grant was basically the same, padded out, of course, with NIH stuff, to make it more substantial, but otherwise the basic aims were the same. I can't remember how many times it took me to resubmit that grant and get reviews back and slowly increase the percentile into the fundable range, at least 2 cycles, I believe. And throughout that period, Tom was willing to believe. So he kept the lab funded, he was supportive of what I was doing, and allowed me to continue that journey. And I think this speaks huge volumes about his character and his belief in the science that I was doing, and in me as an individual in pursuing that journey with his support. In fact, when you look at my CV, you'll see there's a gap between 1987 and 1990 in otherwise what is quite a productive 4 decades of output. That gap relates to that time when I was working through the problem of getting gene targeting to work in ES cells, and the time during which Tom continued to fund the laboratory in the absence of NIH support. So the real memory then is Tom's confidence in me and the willingness to believe that I would work through the problem and solve it. Thank you for that, Tom. Of course, when we finally cracked the problem and I had NIH funding available, the aims of that grant were essentially met. And so we entered into a decade-long period of what I call perpetual NIH funding, perpetual retrospective NIH funding, where the grants were awarded pretty much after all the aims of the grants had been achieved. So for that, I think I really should acknowledge Tom's support in that, and his vision and belief in myself as an individual and in the science that we were conducting. Thank you for that, Tom. And finally, I will close by thanking each and everyone in the department for the fantastic experience I had that really set my career. And it was not just myself, but in fact, what I often would call a menagerie of individuals that Tom collected from all over the world over a number of years, and threw us together on the 9th floor of the Tower building and some adjacent space. absolutely fantastic time. And I really have nothing but fond memories and would like to thank you all for the support I've received throughout that period of time, and particularly for Tom for making that all possible. Thank you so much.
There we go. Let me start by saying that it's a privilege to be here celebrating the life of a great American, Tom Caskey. But I'm here to tell you that he was also a great Canadian. Canada was an important part of Tom's life, and he gave a lot to my country, just as he did to America and to the world. Margaret and I have been friends of Tom and Peggy for over 20 years. We got to know one another on the lake north of Ottawa, where we both have cottages, and at least many of you, I think, have been there, 31 Mile Lake. Our place is a stereotypical Canadian log cabin, and their home, as you know, on 31 Mile Lake is a marvelous heritage home, which they restored on Ahern Island, just about a mile from where we are. Ahern Island is a place that Peggy loves, as you all know, and it's a place that Tom loved too. He got a lot out of his time at the lake, busy though he was. He got fishing and friendship and time to think, and an opportunity to turn his hand to caring for things that really mattered to him. He cared about history, including Canadian history and the history of the island that was his home in Canada. Now, many of the people in this room will know that just over 10 years ago, Tom was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Not everyone will know, though, what he did to earn that honor. It was his work at Genome Canada, the national agency created over 20 years ago to focus and support research in genomics and related matters. I played a very small part in creating that agency, but Tom played a major part in building it. In 2001, just after the management team took over the agency, they ran their first national research competition. I think they had $160 million to spend. That's a lot of money up in Canada. And what they had to do was to award the money in a way that would demonstrate their commitment to research excellence. So for the panel making the decisions on how the money would be spent, they needed truly top-flight researchers from around the world. And to chair the panel, they turned to Tom Caskey. The person that I talked to at Genome Canada, whom I know, said, I knew we had to have Tom. And that was the start of the funding that Genome Canada has done over the last 20 years. The first competition was a success, and it enabled talented young researchers, many of whom had been doing work in the States, to come back to Canada and take up positions where they have thrived ever since. And I'm sure many of you know those people. The second year, Tom chaired the panel again, and this time they had $140 million to hand out. And it's said today that his work at the beginning of Genome Canada laid the foundation for genomics research in Canada. So that's how people see it in Ottawa. Next year, he was invited to join the board, and in 2007, he became the chair of the board. Now, I have to tell you, this is not the sort of thing that happens every day up in my country. An American chair of a Canadian agency, but, you know, that was Tom. So in 2009, the president stepped down, and Tom was invited to serve as acting president of the agency, and that's really rare. But he did a marvelous job, and they appreciate it to this day. So all of that, in addition to his record as a brilliant medical genetics researcher, that's why he was named a Fellow of the Royal Society. And I remember very well, Margaret and I were there at the induction ceremony at the National Gallery, and it was a very special event, and it's a very special honor to be given. Now, on 31 Mile Lake, where many of you have been, there were only a few of us who had an idea of what a great research scientist Tom actually was. Mostly, we knew him as the genial host on Ahern Island, standing at the dock, waiting to tie up your boat as you came over, bringing you up the stone steps to meet yet another amazing friend of theirs from Houston or from California or from South Carolina, eager to show you something he just discovered on the island or about its history, and eager to hear about what you were doing. He was a great listener, and that's a special quality. Sitting on their porch on the island, as many of you will know, with a glass of wine in hand and the sun setting, is a really magical experience. Something we'll continue to do with Peggy over the coming years, and in fact, we'll be seeing her up at the place in about 2 weeks' time, less than 2 weeks. So we look forward to that. Tom loved the time he spent in Canada, and just as he did in Houston, he always tried to give to the community. Now, I wonder how many of you know about the support that he and Peggy gave to Raven Dumont-Maurice, who's a young Algonquin teenager from the nearby Indian reservation who wanted to become a doctor. Well, Tom and Peggy recognized Raven's intelligence and her drive and just her talent. And they helped her to go to university and to medical school at McGill, which is one of our better universities. And today she's a highly regarded pediatrician just across the river from Ottawa. And when she got married, the wedding was on Ahern Island. So one more anecdote. As you all know, Tom was a keen sailor, indeed a racer. So 7 years ago, I decided to join a friend in sailing around the island of Newfoundland. I don't think anybody here in this room's done that. Not many people have actually do it anymore. That's a 1,200-mile, 30-day sailing trip in the North Atlantic. So Tom was a great booster of that project. He gave me a sailor's knife, which I have today, and he signed me up for a remote signaling device that we had on the boat so we could push it every morning to let our wives know that we were still alive, which was a very important thing. And one day, of course, we forgot to push it, and poor Margaret had a heart attack. That's all right. But I think Tom was nearly as proud as I was when we finished that trip. It was really something. When Tom died, America lost a brilliant scientist whose research accomplishments and scientific leadership and driving intelligence made this a better world. We all lost a friend, and in Canada, we feel that loss too. Thank you.
Good day to all. Most of you don't know me. I'm Marty Sutter. I'm the founder and managing director of EW Healthcare Partners. We're a private investment firm focused on the life sciences. We're one of the largest and the oldest. And we had the fortune to have Tom be a part of our team for the past 20 years. And one of my lasting memories of Tom is that when we have offices in London, New York, Palo Alto, and the Woodlands, and our team consists of about 25 people, and we have, including on the team, we're the former chairman and CEO of Bristol Myers Squibb, the former president of Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, the former executive chairman of Novo Nordisk, the former vice president of research and development from Pharmacy and Upjohn, former chairman and CEO of Medtronic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very august group of people. We made our investment decisions after reviewing a company, reviewing the due diligence, by the Motown method. We'd go around the room, and it didn't matter what your rank was, everybody had a vote. And as if we were Berry Gordy and Smokey Robinson, the team made the decisions. Tom was totally comfortable being the only person out of those 25 people to pan an investment, and he was totally comfortable by being the only single person in the room that would support an investment that made no sense to the rest of us. But because of his massive intellect and that objectivity, I always listened to Tom, and Tom always guided my decision. Maybe we ought to look a little bit further into this. So his passing was very, very, very heavy on the hearts of our team. And when I made the announcement to our team via email, sent it out, and essentially a tidal wave of feedback came back in the form of emails. And it was so profound to me, I accumulated them, and my thinking was at the appropriate point in time, I would like to share them with Peggy and with Caroline. And I'm going to share some of those right now. And I've tried to read this about a dozen times without crying because I'm a big crybaby. But I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it. So from former Merck executive who was a CEO of 3 specialty pharma companies that all sold for over $1 billion very rapidly. Dear Marty, this is extremely sad news and my sincere condolences to the family. I knew Tom at Merck as a young man starting in the game. While visiting West Point, he taught me a lot and gave me a tough time with a smile. But I can tell you I admired him massively. He was a genius, I think. Those of us at his table at the last partner meeting, which was in October and November, will remember him referring to himself as King Caskey, and indeed he was. I'm just glad that my last moments with him were incredibly enjoyable, funny, and pleasant. A very sad loss to all, but I will remember forever sitting next to this great man at that dinner. From Bill Hawkins, former chairman, CEO of Medtronic. Oh my God, so sad. He was a giant in healthcare, someone that I always admired, respected, and listened to his every word. What a loss. From another one of our individuals, this news is shocking and so sad to hear, Marty. I was always energized by his passion for science and innovation, even if he shot down 9 out of 10 deals I showed him. What a huge loss for all of us. From the former CEO of Smith & Nephew, very sad news. From a former senior executive of American Express and who is trustee at the Tufts University Medical Center. Terribly sorry to hear this, Marty. Tom was peerless and a wise colleague inside and outside of EW. He gave me some valuable advice for which we always be grateful. We enjoyed some time sailing with him up in Newport, and most of all, he was just plain wise and always vigorous and enthusiastic. So this comes as a shock, even as we are all getting along. I had just emailed him last week and wondered why there was not the usual prompt, cheery response, which we'll all miss. What a great guy. From a physician consultant to the firm, thank you for letting me know. I was pretty hard not to enjoy spending time with Tom, who was as enthusiastically interested in hearing your stories as he was in telling his own. We can only hope to partially, positively impact the world in the way that he did. His bar was set rather high. I do at times think, quote, what would Tom think, say about this? This is the best legacy one can hope for. From former CEO of Guidant. Marty, on a personal note, this is even more devastating for Brigitte and I. Tom tried to find on several occasions to find a solution for Brigitte's condition and never forgot about her. We lost a friend. From a former senior executive at Abbott, I continue to stare blankly at the Tom Caskey announcement. I had a great dinner with him on my last trip to New York, and I remember telling Garrett and Sophia after the dinner that they should soak in all they can from Tom, as he's a gift. Former founder of Oxford Health Systems, crushing news. I'm sure we join a legion of people who feel like the wind was taken from their sails today. Former executive chairman of Novo Nordisk. Heard the news today on Tom Caskey. I want to send you my condolences. He was a true giant and a true gentleman. You don't see many people like him in your lifetime, and I feel honored to have known and worked with him. From a former founder, CEO of a spin-out out of Genentech that was ultimately sold to Pfizer, I will miss that laugh, as many of you have indicated. That laugh, which always seemed to be a laugh for all of us, always rang true. And from Anna Demerit, who I think communicates regularly with Peggy, I will always vividly remember Tom's dry chuckle, shoulders heaving at funny, outrageous comments and observations made. I miss him dearly. And my last remembrance is a story. Many years ago, we had an annual meeting in San Francisco, and we had an artist group that allowed individuals to come up to the room and paint whatever they wanted on the canvas. And amazingly, during dinner, they would reduce this to something they put inside an acrylic block and handed to everybody as they exited. And so people could, whoever wanted to go up there could go do it. So Tom Caskey decides, well, I'm going to go up there. And he goes in the very middle of the canvas and he paints a red sailboat hull prone vertically in the middle of the canvas. And those of you know, during Hurricane Ike, that sailboat was put in the front lawn of the Lakewood Yacht Club. Now that would have devastated me. Tom was okay with that. And I will always remember in my vision and in the art on our wall, that red sailboat prone vertical in the center of that art piece. God bless him.
My wife Jennifer and I both want to express our deep sadness and condolences to Peggy and family. Peggy, you gave us a cookbook when we left Houston, in which you wrote in the front, Tom says, the best things I make are reservations. I am very fortunate to have had two fathers. Both provided me with a unique home. My first father was Nathan Nussbaum, who gave me not only 23 of my chromosomes, including my Y, he gave me a chance to exist. He studied medicine at the University of Vienna in the 1930s, and when he left, he rescued my mother and then her parents and her sister from annihilation at the hands of the Nazis. He made possible a loving, supportive childhood home where I grew up and could watch him interact with his patients and their families, and I decided very early that I too wanted to practice medicine. The second was Tom, who opened up new horizons and dimensions and gave me my adult home in academia and medical genetics research. The first time I met him was in the fall of 1977, when he took me to his home. Jennifer and I had decided that we were going to move to Houston from St. Louis, and he and Peggy welcomed me, gave me bed and board, and a quiet place to work, writing my first research fellowship, an application to the Arthritis Foundation that supported the first few years of my postdoctoral fellowship. Why the Arthritis Foundation? HPRT, of course, the workhorse selectable locus of somatic cell genetics, and the gene involved in X-linked gout, and more mysteriously, the neurologically devastating Leishmanian. The term visionary is overused. Tom was a visionary. He deserved that label. Back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, his enthusiasm and appreciation for how powerful the marriage of molecular genetics and human genetics was going to be was totally compelling. In case you all think, oh, big deal, anyone could have seen that. Without naming names, there were at least two other Baylor faculty members outside the genetics group when I was here, who I heard referring to recombinant DNA technology and DNA sequencing as a fad that would not pass the test of time. In a similar vein, Tom had the absolute conviction that Baylor had to be in the vanguard of the Human Genome Project, when many of the most respected scientists in the United States were denouncing it as a boondoggle. I had left Baylor by then, was a faculty member at Penn, where we never got beyond first base, while Baylor helped carry the project across the finish line. In Tom's lab, I learned that I could do research, not only to answer interesting, curiosity-driven biological questions, but also solve medical problems that devastated patients and their families. Tom drove home to me the idea that a physician-scientist, at his best, or her best, has the obligation, by virtue of training and temperament, to make discoveries that are both intellectually interesting and medically relevant. In other words, important and worthy of becoming a part of hard-won scientific knowledge and being applied broadly to improve the lives of patients and advance the practice of medicine and impact society. This approach to science was integral to what I learned from Tom. Just as I left my parental home as a teenager, I left my intellectual and academic home at Baylor in 1984 to make my own way. I owe much to Tom, which I can never repay. Let me just tell you one anecdote. One of the most thrilling experiences of my life, probably second only to the birth of my children and grandchildren, occurring soon after the successful cloning of mouse HPRT by a team in Tom's lab. I was trying to get southern blotting with the HPRT cDNA to work. I noticed a lot of variability in some very large BAMH1 restriction fragments, 20, 22, 25 kilobases in size. And I set up an experiment with a large family in which I had observed this variability, and I ran a BAMH1 southern blot. And I have this clear memory, standing in the darkroom, feeding an X-ray film into the processor in this room that was suffused with red light, quite lurid. Those of you who have done southern blots know how frustrating they are, since they take most of a week to do and you don't know if you screwed up until the very last step. The film processor motor turned on, the film slid out of my hand into the feeder, then the buzzer sounded, meaning I could now turn on the light. After a few moments, I saw the film emerge and drop into this clunk, into this little plastic holder. Snatching it up, I ran into the lab and decoded the lanes and found to my absolute delight that all that variability actually tracked as a 3-allele Mendelian trait in that family. For me, I felt a unique and powerful rush of seeing an experiment that showed me something that no one knew before. I had made a discovery. I ran into Tom's office. He readily agreed to go over with me. He was encouraging, kind, and generous. He gave me one of his famous raucous cackles of delight, completely good-natured, without even the slightest hint of derision. Partly because I think he enjoys seeing a good experiment, but mainly because he couldn't get over how jazzed I was with what he knew was a nanometer step for man and hardly a giant leap for mankind. But it still warranted a paper in PNAS. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Gibbs, proud to call myself a Caskey trainee. Dear Peggy, Caroline, Clifton, and the Caskey family, and all friends that I know, I realise because of Tom. It is wonderful to be here. I believe that a good life is a journey of self-improvement, but that's the tough thing. Self-improvement is a difficult endeavour, and it's almost impossible if you don't have a compass or a guide to help you along the way. So some of us are truly fortunate to get individuals in our lives who do lead us to be better people, individuals whose personal presence and gift of example is so powerful that simply because of them and the example they set, we do bring about changes in ourselves and that personal improvement. We see an example of intellect, of purpose, of kindness and integrity, and we just want to be like that ourselves. And those individuals, of course, are rare, and having someone like that in your life is rare too. And so I think we all agree that Tom was one such person. And if I look around this room, I see many who agree that they too have been helped and inspired by Tom. For me, Tom was first the life-changing emissary who came from the other side of the globe and offered me an opportunity to experience the most exciting scientific environment in the world. He had a talent for recognising an innate scientific curiosity and an energy in others, and he responded to seeing that by giving opportunity. And you'll hear this same story from many, many people that he knows. So as a postdoctoral fellow, I joined Tom's laboratory in 1986. Most of the others there were postdoctoral fellows too. I think there were 20 at one point and just 2 graduate students and a couple of technicians, which is an unusual environment many of you will recognise. The laboratory was as dynamic and exciting as you can possibly imagine, and many of us have memories of working at the bench and the excitement at the end of the day, knowing that Tom was doing the rounds. He would come by to chat and hear about progress and the problems in the experimental work. It was striking to us all how much he was both in the weeds and also he was ever present, even though he travelled relentlessly and communicated with the highest groups of scientists and policy, but he was never out of touch. So he really never left his true science community here back in Houston. He was the mentor who offered challenge, guidance and encouragement. Everyone in his sphere experienced this, and a conversation with Tom was sometimes challenging. He offered new ideas, but then he would also give goals that were sometimes in your own mind. But then he would make them doable and urgent. He would bring techniques to us and say, hey, have you heard about this? and then leave us to fit the new possibilities into our work. So quite simply, Tom would make you think ahead lest you got left behind. We all admired him so much. The well-known example of the T-shirt we made with all of his travel displayed like a series of rock concerts that all happened in 1 year, and the caption, Tom Caskey, World Tour, emblazoned on it, it spoke to our great affection. Throughout, Tom gave all the intangible support you could never really appreciate until you were older. Building an organisation, sustaining an organisation, creating opportunity, inspiring others to build, sustain and create. All this is Tom's legacy, and like many others, I've only wished that I could emulate just some of that. We were fortunate in the last few years that Tom joined the Human Genome Sequencing Centre and he became what we called a stimulant, provoking and inspiring whenever we met. Staff and faculty were in awe of Tom, and he exercised his ability to inspire all on all occasions. We were reminded that Tom had been thinking and aiming towards the concept of precision medicine for all his working time. Everything he had done for the previous 6 decades aimed in that direction. For a while it was called human molecular genetics, but now it's grown to be precision medicine. So, as you can see, I don't actually have any Tom Caskey stories for you. I do have, of course, many memories, stored vignettes and anecdotes where he is the major figure. But for me, there's just no one story that can capture all that Tom is, all that Tom was, or a fraction of what he did. To me, for the part of his life that I was privileged to know him, and for when I always tried to be more like him, Tom was like a flash of lightning that lasted 3.5 decades. So, along with all who, like me, got so much from Tom, we thank for these gifts. And we thank you, dear Peggy, as well.
Good afternoon. First of all, let me thank my friend Huda for organizing such a nice event, for organizing this memorial, and for inviting me to say a few words about Tom. So I warn you that it's not going to be easy. So I'm going to read. So dear Peggy, Caroline, and Cliff, and dear friends, I have such strong feelings and emotions today. On one hand, I'm very, very sad for the occasion and for the big empty space that Tom's loss left in our hearts. But on the other, I'm also very glad for the opportunity to see so many colleagues and friends with whom I shared really an exciting and important part of my life. You heard the other stories, of course. They look all the same. It means something. So I first met Tom, who was very young pediatrician at the time, at a meeting in Italy. It was on the coast near Genoa, and it was the first edition of the European course of medical genetics. And needless to say, Tom was the star of the meeting. So a few days before the meeting, I had already decided to move to Cambridge, UK for a postdoc. So I gave a short talk at the meeting, and then after my talk, Tom told me that he wanted to have a chat with me. I didn't know him, actually. I knew his reputation, of course. So we went to a bar. We had a beer together. So he looked at me, and I clearly remember his intense eyes. You know, I'm sure you know what I mean. And he started to talk to me with his charisma. Honestly, I don't remember what he said to me at the time. I just remember that like 15 minutes later, I called my wife to tell her we are no longer going to Cambridge, UK. We are going to Houston, Texas. That's true, huh? Not making this up. So a couple of months later, before moving to Houston, I went to the American Society of Human Genetics meeting in New Orleans. So I was attending one of the talks, and it was a huge auditorium, dark. And I noticed a guy sitting in front of me. Actually, I noticed his strange T-shirt, and here Richard scooped me about this. So it looked like one of those T-shirts that one would wear at a rock music concert. So the back of the T-shirt said, Tom Caskey's 1988 World Tour. I said, wow, you know, my future boss is a rock star. I mean, a true rock star. You know, there are all the dates with all the cities and throughout the year. So, by the way, the guy wearing that T-shirt was actually Marcus Grumpy, whom I didn't know at the time. And later, of course, he became one of my best friends. And I met him like in this huge auditorium in New Orleans. You know, but it was quite a coincidence. So when my wife and I finally arrived to Houston, Tom and Peggy hosted us, of course, in their beautiful home for a few days. We really loved the wonderful hospitality and charm. I mean, it was a fantastic time. You know, you have to imagine that Italian professors are not quite like that, you know. So from then on, my experience at Baylor was really amazing, with so many great people, so many great scientists, all in the same place, you know. And this was thanks to Tom's and Art's, where is Art? And Art's vision. I'm really grateful for that experience to both of them. You know, after less than a year, I think I was promoted assistant professor. It looked like a dream to me. It was the same day as David Nelson, who was also promoted, and my friend David. And we shared the office, our first office. So having Tom as my boss gave me the opportunity to learn a lot. And, you know, I could start now and then tomorrow about the things I learned from him. But I think in particular, he showed me how to be an effective leader, and how to motivate people, and how to get the best out of them. His enthusiasm was really contagious. So I'd like to finish with a little anecdote that will give you an idea of my feelings for Tom. I think Bob said that Tom was like his second father, and actually I keep saying that for a very long time. I even wrote that to him. So the story, the anecdote. About 3 or 4 years ago, my youngest son, Marco, was 17 years old at the time. He was really uncertain about his future, didn't know whether or not he's going to make it, was going to be successful, and so on. And of course, I had told him a lot of stories about my time here and about Tom. So once he came to me and he said, Dad, what is the name of that American professor who believed in you, supported you, and changed your life? And I replied, his name is Tom Caskey. And my son said, what if I never find somebody like him? So that really impressed me a lot. And so I reassured him that if he worked hard, sooner or later, he will find somebody like Tom in his life. And I'll stop here, and I want to give my love to Peggy, Caroline, and Cliff.
So when Huda rang me and asked me to speak today, I was really honored to be one of Tom's many postdoctoral trainees to pay tribute to Tom and the family who we all miss very dearly. I had just seen Hamilton, and so Huda and I chatted about it, and I was very inspired. So I thought, well, what would Tom do? And he was really inspired by something. And he wanted to adapt that technology or that approach. He would go to the top dog. Like when Tom Maniatis' lab developed denaturing gradient gel electrophoresis, Tom flew Rick Myers down to our lab, and then pretty soon Richard Gibbs had denaturing gradient gel electrophoresis going in the lab. So I decided to reach out to my homeboy Snoop Dogg. I am a professor at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and well, I'm no Tom Caskey, and so Snoop Dogg did turn me down. So I went with Plan B to celebrate Tom's life.
We are here to celebrate and honor the legendary giant, CTC. He was a mighty leader, a captivating storyteller, a most remarkable visionary. He was innovative, very generous, and an influential mentor extraordinary. Let's not forget that Dr. Caskey took the greatest pride in the regatta he won from Corpus to Galveston for the third time at the age of 81.
Yo, Caskey fans, let's skip it!
And listen, Tom's life is a cause for celebration. Wisdom, Tom gave us rightly. With fire in the belly, you'll shine brightly. Will it ever die? Yo, he said no. You must have grit. Then throw your might at the bench and all you can handle. Write up the paper and be ready to gamble. Science, put the editor who dooms. You make the cover, impress the neutral. Submit, abstract, imaginary. Keep data tables moving, not stationary. Can you write this graph while I'm away? We said no way, but it was done in 5 days. Report on conference we hadn't attended. Hey, combat training, minds expanded. CTC the leader, CTC the mentor, CTC inventor, CTC forever. CTC the leader, CTC the mentor, CTC inventor, CTC forever. He drew a wild crew, what a colossal ruckus they often did brew. Rammed a hole with a bike in the wall of the lab, lots of readers and infers and ran up the tab. Boom! Tom's plan was very simple, take him to the pub, get him to dribble all the secrets on what they're thinking. Before you know, the top choice is reeled in. Southern hospitality was Tom's thing, lending us his credit card, wow, with no string. Throwing grand parties and taking us sailing, working us hard, we can't be failing. His handwritten notes, each one of a kind, 2-sentence memos that spoke his mind. Leaders he made and let them shine, that was his purpose. Many thanks are in line. CTC the leader, CTC the mentor, CTC inventor, CTC forever. CTC the leader, CTC the mentor, CTC inventor, CTC forever. CTC the leader, CTC the mentor, CTC inventor, CTC forever.
well, Pragna, that's going to be hard to follow. And I did email Huda, and she said, yeah, no slides. She never said anything about, whole YouTube videos. So hello, I'm Sharon Plon, and I want to really thank Huda and Art for the honor and opportunity. We're going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about Caskey's impact on physician-scientist training. I actually first met Tom, it sounds similar to others, when, as an M.D. Ph.D. student from another institution, I participated in a molecular biology conference on the Greek island of Spetses that Tom after doing boat rides each day at the meeting. And although there were many real leaders and giants in science attending the meeting, Tom was actually kind enough to take the time to learn about my graduate work and ask about my future career plans and provide advice. Although we both had no idea that I would eventually actually wind up at Baylor. Tom was the second director of the NIH-supported Baylor Medical Scientist Training Program, or MSTP, and he served in that role from 1982 to 1993. The program supports outstanding students who complete both MD and PhD degrees and are committed to physician-scientist careers. His outsized personality certainly translated to the leadership of his program. I would often hear stories about him taking the applicants out on his boat during second look, which we then called candidate review, including at least one episode where the applicants had an unexpected swim. I would think how hard it will be for me to compare to his leadership style, and to be honest, that's still true. After stepping down from being MSTP director, Jim Lepsky became director for 14 years, and subsequently I assumed the role in 2006. However, Tom never really left the program and remained an ardent supporter of our program and students, both academically and financially. As you've heard, Tom was a leader in the field of genetics, and he played critical roles in the development of new genetic technologies, and Pragna nicely showed those patents. And when he left Baylor to take a leadership role at Mike, he actually directed half of the proceeds of his patents to support our program. Tom also convinced many philanthropic leaders in Houston to invest in the MSTP to support our students, given how critical the development of physician scientists were to the future of medicine. And it was very obvious to me when we'd go to the annual MD PhD program directors meeting, I was really had the enviable role of leading a program with this type of support that was really not found elsewhere. Importantly, Tom endowed the MD PhD Caskey Scholars, representing outstanding students in the program. And prior to the pandemic, Tom met annually with the Caskey Scholars at a luncheon on campus. He would always listen intently to the students' goals, their latest successes. He also always wanted to hear about their frustrations with their research, and then would provide sage advice. In particular, Tom challenged each student to embrace innovation, which you've heard is one of his hallmarks, as they develop their science and in planning their careers. But Tom also always made a point of spending some time at these lunches talking about his latest adventures with his beloved wife, Peggy, and his family. I heard about the island in Canada, and making a point of demonstrating to our students the importance of a loving family and living life to the fullest. After sending out the sad news of Tom's passing to MSTP alumni, one former Caskey scholar, Mohammed Abd el-Bar, who's now an associate professor at Duke, wrote, "I owe so much to Dr. Caskey." And Laura Aguilar, another alum who is now chief medical officer at Candel Therapeutics, wrote, "He has been and will continue to be such an inspiration to me." They are representative of the incredible depth of former MD PhD trainees from his own laboratory, students in the program when he was director, and the Caskey scholars that Tom influenced. These men and women have gone on to leadership roles throughout the United States, including many who are making contributions towards Baylor's leading role in medicine today. Thank you.
What a wonderful privilege it is to be here today to celebrate the life of Tom Caskey with Peggy, Tom's family, friends, and colleagues. I'd like to draw attention to the title of this section that Sharon just introduced, which is the beloved MSTP program. Art, you used the word love, And I just want to point out that Tom loved the MD PhD program better than any other program, better than the postdoctoral program, better than all you guys' program. It's the MD PhD program. He was such a spirited leader. By way of background, and I'm honored to represent the students of the program today. I did graduate eventually, but I'm representing the students. By way of background, I applied in 1985, and I was an unlikely candidate for the program because I had majored in economics and political science, so I didn't have the heavy-duty research background at all. But I've heard a certain theme today repeatedly, and I experienced that firsthand in the first 5 days of knowing Tom Caskey, a theme that he believes in people before anyone else believes in them. And so I interviewed, and it goes to admissions committee, and I was reminded of this story recently with Jim Lupsky and I think Jeff Rosen, who were there. And my candidacy was attacked vehemently by a strong trauma surgeon by the name of Dr. Maddox. And at that time, Baylor was still very surgery dominant in a lot of ways. It was changing, but anyway, the students used to call him Mad Dog Maddox. I hope he's not watching today, but Tom defended me, and he stood up for my candidacy and actually got me admitted. And it's another story of how he believed in people before anyone else, and it changed my life. So the story I'd like to tell is about what I call Tom's professional bravery. And I had the privilege of knowing Tom in this dimension of drug discovery outside of Baylor after I left Baylor. And I went on an unconventional path, chose to a postdoctoral fellowship with Allan Bradley, and we heard from him today in the wonderful department, and Huda, and everyone was there. I was a much younger person, of course, but I lived such a great life there that I went to Tom and said, I don't think I want to practice medicine. I'm thinking of going into biotechnology, which was totally unconventional, and he supported me. So along the way, after starting on that track, Tom went to Merck, and that was an act of professional bravery. No one did that. He said, I think then, I want to match wits with the scientists in the pharmaceutical industry. And what he didn't realize is they had very different wits than him. I'm not going to call them dim-witted because we heard from Ed Scolnick today they weren't, but they were chemists. And so there was a totally different mentality. And Tom goes in guns blazing as a molecular biologist and geneticist going to change the way the pharmaceutical industry discovers drugs. That was what he wanted to do. And so, I had started Lexicon Genetics and I was CEO, and that was my first job after my postdoc. And so I called Tom immediately for help because I wanted to see if we could get a partner with Merck, and we needed money, of course. And so he invited us out to Merck, and we talked about what we would present. And the whole concept, based on everything done in his department that I learned there, was to use mouse genetics to model drug activity before inventing the drug. So we put this beautiful presentation together, and Tom helped and everything. We go to present. And we go to West Point there. I was so blown away. His office there was huge. He ran this whole campus. The West Point campus of Merck had its own trains that would come in. I mean, this was huge industrialization of drug discovery. And we presented, and basically we almost got laughed out of the room by the chemists. That you got to be kidding me. You're going to build a mouse that's going to model how our next drug is going to work before we... And one of them afterwards, we were walking away, said, there's no way Merck will ever sign this deal or give you any money. Okay, so Tom found a way. He created the Merck Genome Research Institute to develop a second pot of money that he could use to fund things that were pre-competitive, which at that time, I have to admit, we were. And so we did a deal to create 150 lines of selected knockout mice for what we believe would be the next 150 drug targets for the industry. And Merck Genome Research Institute paid Lexicon $8 million. I'd never seen any money like that. And it put us on the map. So we were ecstatic, and we were off and running, and he got Shirley Tillman and all these illustrious scientists to be on our advisory board and guide us in picking this next generation of drug targets. And so we were going to do a press release because, this was huge news for us. And we put out a press release, And basically, we were hoping papers would pick it up, newspapers, the Houston Chronicle, maybe, who knows, maybe the Wall Street Journal, because Tom Caskey was in the quote. And nobody picked it up at all, zero. And so we were real sort of downtrodden. And then I ran to a friend in the Woodlands one day, and he said, I read about your company, that deal you signed with Merck, congratulations. I said, well, where did you read this? And this is before the internet, of course. He said, it's some paper, I'll bring it to you. I said, great. So I get this paper, and it turns out it was a National Enquirer. No joke. So this was a tabloid, supermarket tabloid journal. I mean, not a journal. It was a tabloid. So I was like, get this thing. I'm flipping through it, and there's all sorts of things. There's space aliens, there's this. And then there's this article, and here was the title. Top Texas livestock aren't cows, they're mice. At $53,000 a head, and that ain't no bull. And so I read this, and sure enough, there's quotes, and there's Tom Caskey quoted in the National Enquirer on that day. And we had a good laugh over that. But that's just when I knew that Tom was not only on the cutting edge, but the bleeding edge, and no one had any idea. But that's where he was. He was so out in front all the time. Anyway, we had a lot of ups and downs. When he left Merck, we were fortunate to have him become chairman of Lexicon, and I worked very closely with him for several years, 5, 8 years, with him as chairman of the board, my boss again. It was wonderful. A lot of ups and downs. Together, we raised over $1 billion for drug discovery by this methodology, which was a lot of money then in 2000, and actually still is a lot of money. It was unheard of what he did for us. He taught us how to build all the chain of activities we needed to get from a gene to a drug. We did it in Texas, and he was so proud of that. He backed us in buying a medicinal chemistry company. We bought a company, which I'd never bought a company before, to build these drugs. And ultimately, Tom had his hands on 2 drugs specifically that we started then. Many people don't know about these, but one was a diabetes drug and one was a neuroendocrine drug. Both have been approved. I hope they do well as they grow in the market, but he basically launched these drugs with us from a gene. And that was amazing. So, which brings us to today. Today, of course, you can't even start a drug program without complete knowledge of the gene encoding the target, including the understanding both human and mouse genetics fully. Everyone starts with mouse genetics and human genetics now. These are concepts that Tom established at Baylor and have literally transformed drug discovery research throughout biotechnology and the pharmaceutical industry. It all starts with a gene now. It never used to. They used to be drug hunters. They never started with a gene or a protein. They started with a chemical that they often could not even tell you how it was found, least of all what it did in the body. And that's why they called them hunters, not scientists. In fact, I think they were hunter-gatherers. And Tom brought them agriculture, frankly, to a whole industry. So looking back at the department Tom started, the concepts he personally brought to the pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies he joined, the investors he counseled, and the drug programs he advanced, his professional bravery literally changed the whole drug industry. And for all of us in the Baylor family, we share that incredible legacy.
Thank you, Peggy, Caroline, and Cliff, for letting us celebrate Tom's life here today. It's been a wonderful day, really made wonderful by all of you who accepted Art and my invitation to come and share your perspective. I hope for the young people in the room, you have been inspired to hear how one man can make such a big impact on an institution, on people who they never knew they would meet him, like the student I learned about today from Canada. And the science, the medicine, everything you've heard, I think it's been a wonderful day, and I thank you so much for letting us do it here today. I want to also thank Art for joining me and helping with Peggy collect the pictures, and David Nelson, who put this beautiful slideshow. I would like to thank Brendan, who's hosting us for the reception, and later for Tom's trainees for dinner. And I also want to thank Lisa Folleder, who's really helped pull everything together today. I'm very happy. I hope you're happy, Peggy. I hope Tom is happy. That's the most important thing. So in closing, I wanted to share with you, I wasn't going to speak. I only wanted to read a poem, but Peggy wanted me to say a few words. I thought, since you've heard all the wonderful things about Tom, I wanted to share with you how much he impacted my life and my career. I wasn't a trainee of Tom. I was not mentored by him. I wasn't even recruited by him at the beginning, really. I was mentored by one of his trainees. I was fortunate to be mentored by Art Beaudet. But Tom probably had the greatest impact on my career, and I will summarize that in very few anecdotes. When I finished my training in Art's lab, Art felt it's time for me to start my own lab. And I was a pediatric neurologist. I was hired by Dr. Feigen, the late Ralph Feigen, who knew I was just being lent to molecular human genetics to get trained in molecular biology by Art, but my job belongs back at Texas Children's in the hospital where I should set up my lab. And having got a taste of science being in Art's lab and seeing all the wonderful people Tom was hiring, there was no way I'm going to be anywhere else but in the midst of that basic science vibrant environment that Tom created. But Art was not the chair. He was my mentor. He advocates for me, but he wasn't the chair. Tom was the chair. So my first interaction with Tom was basically begging, wanting to see. Art laid the groundwork, but I had to ask if I could possibly be in one of those labs in the top building because I really needed more interaction with basic scientists. I'm very green, I don't know what I'm doing, and I needed that. And he scratched his head and let me share a lab with Phil Soriano, who was just a new recruit. Phil got the office. I got the bench, a few benches, did not have an office, but I was perfectly happy. And that, in hindsight, was the greatest gift. Because by me not having an office, I was able to be 100% in the lab, working with my student at the bench, and really immersed in training them, working with them, building my lab from the grounds up. And I attribute that's the first secret to success, really being in the lab as much as you can when you start a lab. And Tom sort of caused that unknowingly, and it was wonderful. The second story I will tell you, I was working on a rare disease, spinocerebellar ataxia, and trying to find the gene. Tom and David Nelson, Steve Warren, and other members of the team have announced and shared with us the discovery of the Fragile X syndrome, lots of excitement. And then few months later, almost a year later, I believe, I go to a noon seminar, and I'm sitting listening to Tom giving a talk, and with huge excitement, he shared how his lab discovered that triplet repeat expansion causes myotonic dystrophy. And he shared it way before they've written the paper, very early on, and I was sitting there mesmerized, hearing the story, and as a child neurologist, immediately recognized that in myotonic dystrophy, the mom has a mild disease, the child has a severe disease. So these repeats get bigger from generation to generation. I started thinking, well, the ataxia family I study, they get worse from generation to generation. The minute Tom finished, I ran to the lab, called my collaborator, Harry Orr, and told him, I think SCA1 is a triplet repeat. I just heard Tom describe it for myotonic dystrophy. Let's stop searching this million base pair, which will take you years usually to find a gene. Let's look for triplet repeats, and that we did, and within weeks we found the gene. So Tom inspired my first big discovery. I ran, after telling Art, I ran and told Tom about the discovery. He was very excited and asked Ruth Sorrell to write a story about it, and Ruth is with us today. That was the second time. The third big impact Tom had on my career, you've heard from Ed Scolnick and you've heard from Arthur. He decided to go to Merck. Now, Tom was a Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator, and he was a successful one at that. I just sometimes wonder what all he would have accomplished should he have stayed in that role, because he was really on a meteoric rise with discoveries. But he decided to try to change the culture of industry and wanted to give that a chance, so he left to Merck. And he vacated a Howard Hughes Medical Institute position at Baylor. In those good old days, if there was a Hughes investigator at an institution and they left, the institution can nominate candidates and they can write proposal, and then Hughes will pick that one candidate. So I was one of the candidates who was nominated by Baylor, and I wrote my proposal and submitted it, and I was elected as a Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator in 1996, and got the blessing to get all of Tom's equipment and be in his lab and be in his office in the top 8th floor. I cannot begin to imagine how my career would have been if I didn't have that incredible golden opportunity. And I somehow feel he did it by design. I really somehow feel he had a greater plan when he decided to go to Merck. But that was incredible. I would say majority of my discoveries would not have happened if that opportunity has not come my way. And that was Tom's doing. And we became close friends. We will get together and he'll always share these sparks with me. But one thing I've learned from him throughout the years, and you've seen it today with all the people he's hired. You've heard about the department he built. He believed in model organisms. Back in 1985, the NIH only believed in them in 2012. That's when they started using them to help understand genetics and medicine. It was incredible how much ahead of his time he was. And watching him put people, the yeast geneticists, the fly geneticists, the mouse geneticists, and I collaborated with all of those. And I've benefited from that environment tremendously by collaborating. Everyone you heard from today, I collaborated with, and we're all great friends. But it was really having that mixture that all of us work together. And through this out, he'll tell me, Huda, go after the best. The best will cost you the most at the beginning, but will cost you the least at the end. And if there's 10, Peggy reminds me of that, go for 11. And that stayed with me. I never thought I will use this wisdom. I never thought I will channel Tom. But when I was approached to build an institute for neurological diseases research, that was the first thing that came to mind. How will Tom build this institute? What will Tom do, and who will he recruit? And in that spirit, and working with wonderful chairs, first Art and then Brendan and other chairs at the college, we built it with our faculty belonging to 8 different departments, truly with great strength each, but working together. So I have that to thank Tom also for. So I think if you really pause and think about everything I shared with you, you would recognize that absolutely my career would not be the same if he was not here. When I thought about it after his passing, what an important role he played in my life, and I said, what if Tom wasn't here? I cannot imagine how different we will be. And I'm so grateful that he was here. And for that reason, I picked the poem I'm going to share with you today. It's When Great Trees Fall by Maya Angelou. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly, our eyes briefly see with hurtful clarity. Our memory suddenly sharpened examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us, our souls dependent upon their nurture. Now shrink wizened, our minds formed and informed by their radiance fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed. Thank you. I invite you to a reception to celebrate Tom's life.